How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, it's a beautiful morning here in London, so I'm happy about that. How are you today?
Doing good. Thanks for taking our time, first of all, and giving us the opportunity to host you.
Yeah, no, it's great to be on the show.
Awesome. I see you are also very active on LinkedIn and doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so I could give a bit of a background on myself if you want, and
Yeah,
for
please,
your
please.
listeners.
I
Yeah,
want to ask, please introduce yourself for our audience. Yes.
for sure. So my name's Dylan. I'm the head of data strategy at a small boutique consulting firm in London, called Profusion. And so I've been in consulting my entire career, starting out in pure strategy consulting and transitioning towards data and data strategy, and that kind of lens is what I've built my brand off of on LinkedIn, as you mentioned, as well as Substack. So it's really about kind of bridging the gap between data and strategy, making sure what you do with data is driving value for the organization, is strategically aligned with what the company wants done and the goals of the organization, and that you actually deliver some sort of ROI from the data projects and work you do. And to do that, I always believe that it's more than just thinking about what's in front of you or building something. So thinking about the whole kind of data ecosystem, which is the name of my Substack, actually, my newsletter, because everything in data is intertwined, right? And we
Hmm.
often treat data as individual domains within a larger industry, but we have to think about it how they all are interconnected and what works and what doesn't. And so, yeah, that's a bit of background in myself. And as I mentioned, I live in London, UK, although I am Canadian, so I don't have a British accent.
Okay. Okay, that's a great introduction. So I have given my introduction to everyone. So everybody's whoever is following me, they know that I'm a Doti data guy. So I won't go into my introduction, which we can have one to one separately. But I think your background is very much relevant to our topic today, which is data ecosystem in centralized versus decentralized versus federated. As you correctly mentioned, it's not about just creating a solution. And since this AI era has come, and we are all moving towards data product era where everybody wants their own data, then I think it's not possible to stay in centralized environment. You have to go into decentralized. And the moment you go towards decentralized, you have to federate, means you have to have a layer which is managing all decentralized data products. Else, it'll become a wild, wild west, right? It'll become a swamp of data products. So I think it's a very relevant. So I think let's start with this one because you are a data strategist. So before we go into all these approaches, tell us basic about data strategy, right? As you started in your discussion, that is not about creating a data product. It's about looking at business first. So tell us how you look into and your comment from a data strategy angle before you go into implementation.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's three or four kind of main things to a data strategy. The first thing is that strategic direction that the organization is on and how data can help enable and support that. And that might be your organization's vision and mission, and then you create kind of a data vision and mission out of that, and what those kind of pillars of data are to help support that organizational vision and mission. The second bit is kind of actually what we touched on, what you're about to touch on. We'll probably talk about a bit more later, but what's the organization's data capabilities and how is it set up to deliver against that mission? And this can be from a perspective of like, oh, we've got a really strong data engineering team, but we don't really have the data scientists necessary to do this, or we don't have the organizational structure. So how is the organizational set up to actually enable that? So that's the second element. How's the and then the third element is, I think when we get into the data product discussion, this is what is super popular right now, but it's that use cases. So identifying what those use cases are that match up to the data vision and mission, but also align with the firm and the organization's capabilities. So like, okay, I want to build this new forecasting ML model That's a use case. But what are the use cases to get there? Because it might not just be we build this out of the blue. You need to make sure it's kind of logically structured. So that's the strategic mindset that needs to come in. And a lot of firms don't take that mindset. They just build things out of the blue and then they're siloed. They deliver some value over here, but then they aren't scalable and they just go and die 2 years later. And from a data product sense, you have to kind of be aware of that, of how your data products build and evolve off of the use cases. And then the fourth thing in data strategy, which I'm very adamant about, and a lot of companies don't do well, are how do you execute against this? And that action plan, that roadmap to make it tangible. We don't want, when I do a project, I don't want to just give you a 40-page PowerPoint and call it a day. I want you to make sure that this is something that you can start actioning tomorrow and make sure you are able to do that and execute against these things and actually achieve that data vision you set out. So what's that kind of tangible, realistic roadmap to achieve your data vision and drive and build those use cases that you've identified? So that, in my mind, those four kind of steps, stages are what makes a really good data strategy. But the other thing I just mentioned is data strategy has tentacles. It can go whichever way you want it to go because everything within the data ecosystem you kind of need to think about from a strategic perspective. Otherwise, you're doing yourself an injustice and you're going to be reactive rather than proactive or short-term thinking rather than long-term thinking, etc. So,
Okay, so as you just mentioned one thing, right? If you want to deliver a product, a use case, there are certain steps. You are right. Maybe someone wants to build something which requires to build some smaller piece underneath, like jigsaw, right? So, so if I being a devil's advocate, if business comes, so I'm just keeping my question around centralized and decentralized. Because from centralized, we came out from centralized because we were dependent on a central team, a unified team,
mhm.
who you ask, hey, build me two dashboards. They say, okay, come back in 6 months because they have a backlog. Now, when you say in decentralized world, you create a product, do you really need to focus on other pieces as well? And how productive is that? Because business want this one use case, and you are building blocks, two, three use case. Business don't want to pay for these blocks. They want to pay for this one. And their ROI matches here. So how do you cater this piece? I hope my question is not very tricky.
Well, it's tricky in a sense that I don't see many organizations who figured it out. Um, but from a theoretical perspective, I know when everyone was obsessed with data mesh and decentralization like 3, 4, or 5 years ago, and it was because, okay, the business wants and needs that, so why don't we just build that instead of throwing it into like a waterfall backlog and stuff? And from a theoretical perspective, that makes sense, right? But from a realistic and tangible perspective, to build that use case, let's call it for sales forecasting or something like that. You need that foundation. You need those foundational elements within the data platform, or even within a BI and analytics perspective, right? Like maybe you need a dashboard with your finances where it pulls together all the data before you build the forecasting tool. Because if you don't have that dashboard and that initial pieces of data put together, your forecasting tool is not going to be accurate, right? So I think it's that mix between. I mean, I think the hybrid architecture is pretty much what everyone goes after nowadays in terms of centralization or decentralization, because you need something that's centralized from a platform perspective, from a governance perspective, from a data centralization perspective, but then maybe a decentralized data product build and tooling development to make it more business friendly. The other thing I think to mention is just the ways of working and how the organization is structured and operating. It needs to be a crucial facet of anything that you deliver because a lot of companies just say let's decentralize and then just go and do it without even like organizing their teams in the right way or like
Yeah,
figuring
yeah.
out how people will talk to each other.
It's a
So
complete
I'm
culture change. Yeah.
It is, and like I worked with an organization who had they did a data mesh and they talked proudly about it. But they had like five different teams with five different engineering teams, all building towards the same thing, all building in slightly different ways. And in the end, you looked at it and you're like, your data engineering is an absolute mess because you don't have the resources to dedicate to this.
Mhm.
And they're all your engineers are building in different ways and they're building the same stuff. So you're creating a lot of tech debt and data debt and you're not progressing as fast as you can. So there's like there's elements that should be centralized and there's elements that should be decentralized. And I think leaders need to do that decisioning and figure that out before they go off and announce themselves a data mesh company.
Actually, thank you so much for raising this, right? You are absolutely right, and in a sense where my thought process comes right, because you brought in data mesh. So data mesh talks about domains, which we used to call it subject area last time. Like sales is a separate domain, marketing is a domain, procurement is a domain, finance is a domain, right? So data mesh says keep creating product within the domains and domain owners will own it. Now the challenge comes that marketing needs sales data. So marketing will not create that sales product. Sales has to create that sales product. Now the challenge comes, sales says, why the hell I should spend money on it because I am not getting the value. Marketing is getting the value. Right? So data mesh become very difficult to implement in bigger organizations. Yes, if your organization is a SME organization where costs come from one party and value goes to one party, which is the CEO or board XYZ, and every department or business don't have to spend their budget, then yes, data mesh for me makes sense. But the moment you have an organization where you have to recover the cost from every domain, that is where data mesh becomes a challenge. Now, when you say hybrid, that is, thanks for bringing that onto this podcast, right? I agree that once we have to move from centralized to decentralized, but when we are going into decentralized, we have to come towards federated. Means there has to be a centralized team which is managing all products. And when we say centralized, centralized can be hardware, centralized can be anything, but it has to be managed centralized, right? It has to be hybrid. I give you an example, then you comment on it. For example, we have 50 odd source systems, which contains Oracle, SAP, XYZ applications. And then we have, let's say, 100 products, something like that. Now, if 100 products are keep hitting 50 applications, so it's the connections are 100 multiplied by 50. So many connections. So I feel there has to be an integration hub in the middle right after the source system where everything lands into it, that becomes centralized to serve rest of the products. And then rest of the products can build data vault, focal, they want to build 3NF, they want to build dimension model, whatever they want. But this integration hub become a centralized piece. Apart from that, the other things can be centralized. So I think you have brought this from this angle is a good point. Can you spend more time onto it? Because I really want people to understand this. Once you go into decentralized, not nothing like that. You are going out of centralized. No, there will be some pieces there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're explaining is the role of the data warehouse and then the role of data marts within an organization. Like you can have different data marts and repositories within
Mhm.
different teams, especially as you become a large organization. You
Yeah.
need that extra space. And but you have that data warehouse as that single source of truth of kind of okay, if I do some analysis on the finance team, and that might be helpful for other teams that could go back to the data warehouse that should go back to the data warehouse in another file and then it can be pulled into the other data hubs for the other teams but to your point you still need that single source of truth and you still need that kind of because everything I mean I talk about the data ecosystem being intertwined but everything in a business is intertwined right like your sales which is a finance thing helps dictate what you do with your marketing, which is a customer thing, which helps dictate what you do with your ops, right? So you have to really kind of make sure that those are intertwined. But if they need separate products and they need